Good evening, Barbados. We are coming to you today from Her Majesty's Prison, Dodds, with this press conference. We've changed the format slightly from the other press conferences of recent. There's no actual moderator. I'm going to be doing the moderating. We try to minimize the amount of persons involved in the press conference because, as you can well appreciate, Dodds is a national security facility. So we have to control what it is that we do here, who has access to the premises. So we're going to do the best we can with what we have and try to get the information to you. I will just give a brief overview, then I'll introduce Colonel Nurse to give an update on the state of affairs at the prison. After that, we're going to have Dr. Ward, who is the doctor who has been managing patient care and care as it relates to any prison officers here at the prison. Also on hand to answer any questions that may arise in relation to the last 15 days is Major Cedric Proverbs, who was seconded from the Barbados Defense Force to the post of Assistant Superintendent of Prisons, acting, and he will also be here to answer any questions you may have. The aim of this, we've been getting a lot of questions about what is going on at the prison. We've been getting questions about relating to the concern of relatives about their family who may be at Her Majesty's Prison. And a lot of rumors have been swirling. We've spent more time over the last couple of days dealing with fake news and rumors about what is happening in the prison, and it's actually taken away from our ability to concentrate on the things that we actually need to do here. So the thought was we'll have a full press conference, allow the press to ask whatever they want to ask. We will answer any questions that are put to us unless they concern or compromise national security. And at the end of the day, I hope that people have a better appreciation of what is happening in the prison and they have the answers to the questions that they have been seeking. The one thing I will say up front, I've gotten a lot of questions and messages about the well-being of individual prisoners. As much as we can, we have tried to facilitate that by answering. So if you send and ask a question about John Doe, I will ask them please to check on the status of John Doe, on his well-being, his general spirits, whether he's in good spirits. But before I release that information to you, the concerned relative, I need John Doe's permission to do that. And some people think that we're being evasive. I have nothing to hide. I have no reason to not inform you about the status of any person who may or may not be in Her Majesty's Prison, Dodds, or the female prison. But we also have to respect the medical confidentiality of anyone who is housed here. So, as I said, we will attempt to answer all questions that are put to us so that at the end of this, everyone can have a full appreciation of what is happening at Dodds. But before I turn over to Superintendent, I just want to say we've gone through a very difficult time at the prison over the last 14 or 15 days. There have been some officers who have recently gone off into quarantine, having been on constant duty for over 15 days. It has not been easy. It is not the ideal situation. We found ourselves in an emergency situation and we had to deal with what we had to deal with. The prison is not your neighborhood. There are concerns that affect the prison with respect to security, with respect to the safety of persons in prison, with respect to the integrity of the prison system that don't necessarily obtain on the outside. So certain decisions had to be made that reflected the severity of the concerns that we had. So for those officers who were here for 15 days straight, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. The Prime Minister did it yesterday, but I also want to reinforce and emphasize our thanks. The sacrifice that you made in performing your duties and your job under what must have been very trying circumstances is fully appreciated. Yesterday, I came to the prison and I had a meeting with those who were on site for the 15 days, and I had a meeting with some of those who were coming off of quarantine and coming to resume their duties. And I was able to answer a lot of questions that the prison officers had to ask me. We were able to address some of the issues that they had. The general feeling, despite what you might be hearing from some quarters, is one of positivity. A number of people are anxious to get back to work. One of the last people who spoke to me yesterday said, Minister, I'm going to do my 5 days quarantine, and then I'll be reporting for duty. Have no fear. And I want to thank him for that. But for all who have played their part put their hand up and said, I answer the call of duty, and who've supported the prison, the government, the inmates in the prison, and the people of Barbados in this most critical time, right? Verbal thanks is not enough, and we're going to make things right by you. So I just want to put that out there right now, that the sacrifice of these brave officers who are heroes in Barbados, it was not easy. The sacrifice has been registered, it has been noted, and is fully appreciated by myself, the Prime Minister, and the rest of the government of Barbados. So having said all of that, I'm going to invite Colonel Nurse, who's the Superintendent of Her Majesty's Prison, Dodds, to come forward and give an update as to the situation of the prison. And after that, we're going to have Dr. Ward to give a medical report on the circumstances of the prison, and then we're going to open the floor to any and all questions you may have once they don't touch and concern issues of national security. So thank you. Colonel Nurse.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I'm very happy to be able to report on the affairs at the prisons. As you're aware, we have been battling COVID-19 for the last 15 or so days. Right now, the situation at the prison is stable, and it continues to be so. We have over 70 officers who have reported to duty on a rotational shift basis, and we are able to, in large measure, put a number of the systems that we usually would have in place back into place. Of course, there will be some restrictions as we have suspensions of certain activities to allow us to focus on what is absolutely necessary at this stage to make sure a healthy and a safety environment. We will have gone through and continue to do all of our sanitization of the various locations across the prisons. The staff who have reported are quite happy in doing what they have to do. The inmates who are here are all settled. They are participating in whatever activities are available to them, and we hope that we can be able to return to a state of absolute normalcy in a very short space of time. So with that very short introduction, I make way now for the doctor, Dr. Ward. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Carl Ward. I'm a doctor with the Ministry of Health. And just a little bit of a clarification, I am here more as a public health liaison. So the actual management of ill inmates and so on is being handled by staff from the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in the prison's medical facility. Our current numbers would be 240 inmates, okay, and that is all male inmates. And the numbers of staff would be 72 staff members who have tested positive for COVID. I think it's important for us to explain that those numbers are not static and that people are being discharged. It would have been mentioned that several of the prison officers and staff would have been discharged from Blackman Gollop a few days ago. And I'm still collecting the numbers to find out how many more of the positive staff are going to be discharged soon. And as far as the inmate population, again, while you might see a number of 240, you have to bear in mind that their time of quarantine, their time of isolation, not quarantine within the prison, for many of them is now over. So some 76 inmates would have completed their 14 days of quarantine yesterday, and there are another 34 pending today. So when you get in this number of total positives, you have to remember that not all of those people still have COVID. Not all of those people are still in isolation. The prisoners have not been, the inmates have not been doing badly. The medical facility that has been set up that's been upgraded has 18 regular beds and 2 critical care beds with space for expansion. There's another part of the medical facility that's still there for people who are ill, who do not have COVID, or who we don't suspect of having COVID. Thus far, 3 individuals have been treated in the facility, 2 inmates and 1 officer. One of the inmates was known to be COVID positive, and the other 2, at the time they were treated, their second result, because remember we would have done 2 rounds of testing on the staff and the inmates, their second result wasn't available at the time, but they were treated as if they were positive for safety reasons. At present, there's no one being treated within that facility, so therefore I can let the public know that the inmates are stable as well, right? I think it's also important to let people understand that as we may still expect some positive cases to pop up among staff and inmates, that this is behind the crest of the wave. The wave has crested, the wave has moved on. Because of some of the delays and challenges that we've had in the country with so many tests going on in such a short space of time, what that means is that the results you're getting back now are results that were backlogged. Okay? And I think that's important for you to understand then that it's not some ongoing explosion of cases at Dodds. What you're seeing coming up as positive would have been people who were positive several days back, and we are now getting the result. Now, as far as the prison officers who would have been turned positive, if you could call it that way, in the past few days, they were either isolated already at hotels or they were here working, right? As soon as there was any hint that their result was heading in that direction, then they would have been quarantined here on compound before any confirmatory results said that they were positive. The other number that might be of interest to the public is that there are 8 inmates with what we call pending positive results and 2 officers with what we call pending positive results. That would have been mentioned, I think, that term would have been mentioned, I believe, by Dr. Best at a previous press conference. So just to explain what that is, when the lab does your test, does the swab test, they run an initial test, and that initial test, if it's negative, you're negative. But then you can get something they call a pending positive, where it's looking positive, but then they have to run a confirmatory test to prove whether you're positive or not, right? So we have a few inmates, as I mentioned, and 2 officers that are in that zone right now, and we have to see what's gonna happen there. I think that's about it for me right now, unless y'all have some questions for me a little bit after. I can hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent and Dr. Ward. I'm going to open the floor for questions, but let me start by addressing one that came through to me. A question was asked, why are we having the press conference here at Dodds? The reality is we need all hands on deck here. The press conference was being done to facilitate getting answers to the people of Barbados, answers to people who have been wanted, and answers to the press who have been calling me all the time. Apparently everybody in the press got my phone number. So they've been calling, and we've been trying to address those. The press conference had to be here because you would want to hear from Colonel Nurse. I believe people may want to have questions for Major Proverbs, and people may also want to have questions for the doctor, all of whom were here and can't leave at this point in time because we're trying to get back to a state of normalcy. So in order to facilitate everybody, we had to make the arrangements to have the press conference here so that the persons that you actually want to hear from will be available to answer any questions that you have to ask. So that is why the press conference is actually going on at Dodds. But we have sanitized the entire area. It is sanitized at least once a day. It's been sanitized for this press conference. And as you can tell when you came in, all the necessary protocols were followed. All the personal sanitization was done. and we're trying our best with the masks and not touching each other. So the floor is now open to questions.
Quite recently, the NUPW directed some of its staff not to attend work at the prison. Could you give me an update on how that has affected the operation of the prison? Operation at the prison?
I'm going to turn that one over to Colonel Nurse.
Thank you, Minister. We have not had any adverse effect from not having our civilian staff here. We have been, as you know, from March, practicing certain activities related to COVID-19. So for some time, we have been, when we had the initial lockdown, had some of our civilian staff operating from at home and operating virtually. That has been stood up again, so we're able to operate. There are one or two areas that we will obviously need our civilian expertise at some stage. We've put in representation for that, and hopefully that will be approved. Doesn't have anything to do with face-to-face or close contact with prisoners or with staff. Is more to do with making sure that our equipment and everything else is functional. So once that is approved, again, that will be rolled out. But for right now, no adverse effects.
Just one follow-up. Has there been any discussions with the NUPW in terms of having those workers return back to work?
That will be done through the ministry. Right now, I'm laser focused on trying to get this institution back up and running as per normal. We have excellent support right now from the Ministry of Home Affairs in trying to get all of the other support mechanisms in place to get us going. So that is being done from that perspective.
Lieutenant Nurse.
Colonel.
One second. Colonel, just 1 second. Just to answer your question, I've spoken to Mr. McDowell, and what we have agreed is that nobody has to come on the compound who is not essential for the compound to operate. So, for example, HR or payroll that can do those remotely, those would happen remotely. But there are some civilians who have to work in the control room. They have to be physically present in the control room. For those who perform that essential service, they'll be expected to come in. But anybody else that can perform their function off-site will be allowed to do so and accommodated in doing so. I believe that Mr. McDowell at the moment is comfortable with that representation, but we will work with the staff, we will work with their representatives, we will work with their council to get the best arrangement that can meet their needs, but also still secure the safety and integrity of the prison.
Yes, sir. Can you tell us how many prisoners were due to be released during this period?
For the month of January, I'll talk to the entire month of January, there are about 26. And we are in the process of looking at how that can be achieved and achieved safely. Of course, you will appreciate that it will have some medical input into that to make sure that we're doing all of the things correctly. So that should start rolling out fairly shortly. Fortunately, there are not very many numbers as at today, but as the month unfolds, you will see it picking up a little bit.
Okay. Some of the officers complained about the place not being sanitized properly or properly cleaned. What can you say about those?
Well, what I can say to you in that respect is that we have a team that from as early as March has been going through and sanitizing all of the buildings, all of the work areas, all of the work spaces, living spaces, and so on a daily basis. That was ramped up most certainly after our information about the presence of COVID-19. So that was increased significantly. I can say to you as recently as this week, we had mint condition in to do a full industrial clean. We've also, again, as I said, ramped up our operation. We also purchasing additional equipment to make sure that we're on top of all of the cleansing and sanitization that we need to do.
Have you had any unrest or uneasiness among the inmate population?
Not to my knowledge.
Really?
Not to my knowledge.
It's a hotel.
I wouldn't say it's a hotel, no. Prisoners who have been here have gone through issues before. We know how to operate, we know how to behave. But of course, an individual will have concerns. We've all been listening to the news. We've all been watching our televisions. We know what is going on in other countries as it relates to COVID-19, so there are fears, and genuine fears. What we have been doing is attempting to quell those fears and to provide the level of professional care to all of our prisoners and to all of our staff to make sure that we can be as comfortable as possible, knowing what we are supposed to do and how we are supposed to do it. I really can't transport myself into someone else's brain to say to them, well, forget the dangers or forget whatever else is there and be cool and calm. All we can do is what we need to do to make sure that the environment is safe, and what we need to do is to be able to communicate that to all. Then their behavior in terms of how they accept that and project that is completely up to them.
Colonel Nurse, in terms of the mental stability of those inmates who are positive, have you had any who have had to go for either counseling? Has anyone tried anything suicidal, anything of the like?
No, and I'm quite sure Dr. Ward can also speak to this, and so too Major Proverbs. We've been able to tap into the resources of both the Defense Force and also to the Ministry of Health and Wellness to have those professionals come in and deal with those areas. But as far as I'm aware, we've not had any need for crisis interventions just yet.
Okay, next question.
One second.
Okay.
Sorry, just out of fairness to Colonel Nurse, for the last 15 days, Colonel Nurse was off-site. So the person who had operational control at that point in time was Major Proverbs, who probably in a better position to answer some of the questions that were just asked. But I just want to address one thing that was asked. And this one keeps coming up. It's come up from some lawyers, it's come up from other people, it's come up from the media. We do not want to keep a person in prison a day or a second longer than they have to be here. If you have served your sentence and you've done your time, it is our priority to try to get you out so that you can reunite with your family. We were under a period of no one in, no one out. That was ordered by the Chief Medical Officer. In some sense, that has been lifted slightly. So we are putting arrangements in place to separate those who are due for release on a rolling 28-day period. And once we can get them to have the 2 negative tests in that point in time, so that we are satisfied that they are not a danger to themselves or they won't pose a risk to anybody outside, then they are free to go. From the time you've been separated and you go on your second test, you are free to go with my blessing. And I will thank you for your patience in the time that you were here. So we are not on any scheme, as has been suggested in some areas, to try to keep people here and deprive people of their rights. Quite frankly, the more people who are due for release and who can be released out of the prison is the less logistically that we have to deal with. So apart from the altruistic part of it, right, there's the practical part that we want to be able to accommodate all of those who have served their time, to let them go home so that we can get on and focusing on those who have to be here and for whom the release at this point in time is not an option.
So have any been released today?
No, no one has been released to date, but believe me, we are fast tracking it as quickly as possible to try to get persons out and home.
Good evening, Barbados. Good evening, press. Your questions, please.
Well, he said you might have been in that position where I was asking about the mental stability and any attempts.
Okay, so during the initial phases of this operation, the prison was placed under lockdown for two reasons. One, from a health emergency mitigation perspective, and then the other from a security perspective. So let me just address the question that was asked earlier by your colleague as it relates to any type of what we might call aggro within the prison setting. So far, that has been under control simply because the methods that have been tried and proven within the prison system seem to have worked very well in terms of controlling that type of behavior. And what has actually happened is that we have introduced persons from the BDF, Barbados Defense Force, into the prison setting because of a shortage of manpower that was available because of those who were placed into quarantine. They have learned quickly, but have also been able to arrest some of the threat that may be resulted from the type of conditions that the prisoners were operating under. Further to that, I believe that the prisoners themselves understand the danger. And on arriving here, one of the first things that was told to me by the medical staff here at the prison is that the prisoners seem to get it. And that was without a shadow of a doubt. And what I mean by that is that I went into the prison itself, took a bold step to go into the prison itself to see what was going on. And being there, the prisoners were masked. Who was not masked, when I pointed at them, they quickly donned their masks, and were able to be part of what we have come to do here, to protect the prison. And they were doing it because they want to protect themselves, because they understand that they want to get back to their families, those of them who are due for release, and those who are here, they want to protect themselves. So having gone through what I believe was the H1N1 period, I think that the prison itself was very well prepared for that aspect of it. Getting back to your question, could you have it again, please?
I was asking if, given the positive patients, etc., how was it weighing in on the mental stability of the inmates? Okay, so the Barbados Defense Force, again, was able to add what we call the psychosocial interventionists or operatives into the network here. And since coming here, we had two, I would say probably, tragic situations where, while we were under lockdown, two of the prisoners, one's sister would have passed and one's grandmother would have passed. And we thought it may have been a bit of a tense period for them, but having gone into the prison, counseled, spoken to them, they recognized that even with some of the privileges of telephone communications and so forth, because I know I have a family, so I know they want to reach their family, and we were able to introduce that to them. Unfortunately, some people would have taken the advantage to put some malicious information into the public sphere. But at the end of the day, they're humans and they think they want what is best for them. And just to mention that, we try to treat them as human. So we anticipate that that will happen, because as soon as we opened again, I think it was yesterday, another press release, or so people were able to use the social media to get some information out that they thought would probably divert our efforts here. But we continue, and I think that they're pleased, and they will continue.
Just a follow-up.
Yes, please.
You mentioned those malicious reports, and in those reports, some of the prisoners are claiming that they aren't receiving masks, their hands aren't being hand sanitized. Could you respond to those allegations? Of course,
of course. If you wish, I believe that we have the accounts that would testify to the number of masks that were issued from even before I came here until at present. I think we've issued over 2,000 masks to the prisoners during this period, and we only have 700, and at that time when I came, we only had 790. So if we do quick calculations, that more than 2 masks per prisoner was issued. So that is that's strangely true.
I have a question for the doctor.
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. Yes.
Hey, Doctor.
Hello.
You made a reference that essentially the worst has passed at the prison.
Yes.
Right now we have about 240, just over 200 inmates who have tested positive.
Thus far, yes.
Right. So in terms of going forward, what numbers are you looking at in terms of an increase? And in terms of stabilizing the whole situation at the prison, give me a time frame for that.
Well, okay, so when this started, the plan was to follow the prison's H1N1 plan, which was in place from before. The prison has a pretty large block that is able to take quarantined inmates, right? Which is also where new inmates coming into the system go for a while before they're released into the general prison population. What happened though is that in short order, the numbers were such that we could not put positive inmates in that setting like we would have before. The numbers were more than that could hold. So what we started to do is we started to identify blocks or sections within blocks to work as quarantine or, well, not quarantine, isolation areas. Because if you have a bunch of guys who are all positive, right, unless there's some other issue, so for example, you know, this is a prison, so then you have some guys who are on remand and some guys who should be in maximum security. You're not going to mix them. But otherwise, you then put the people who are positive one place and let them stay there. You make certain blocks and certain areas the isolation areas. What has happened, though, is some of the delays on getting some people's test results made things a little tricky. And the current decision is that obviously those who we know are positive, they're isolated. When their 14 days are up, they are released from isolation and they're free to be moved around as prison administration sees fit, right? The other people who are not positive, we have a block, like let's say the female block, who's had no positives, and our goal is to absolutely keep it that way. And then you have some other people who maybe we don't have their second result as yet. But again, even if their second result was to come in as positive, right? So I still expect some more to pop up, right? Because we certainly don't have all their results yet. But we are keeping them in, I know you hear this term all the time, lockdown. We're keeping them in a sort of lockdown, right? So that their time will pass in that section as well. So I would like to think that in certainly less than 14 days from today, certainly less than 14 days, everything should be normal for the prison, for the inmate population, right?
But can you account for the rapid spread and why you're still getting people testing positive?
Well, the reason people are still testing positive is because we would have done the tests. The prisoners would have had their second test on the 5th and the 6th of January, and we didn't get back all the results, and some are still trickling in, right? So the numbers I would have given you, would have told you today 240. Yesterday the total was 239. One guy's second result came in today and was positive this morning, right? But that, bear in mind, that was a result from pretty much 10 days ago, right? Almost 10 days ago. And so it's basically delay. So what you're seeing now, as I would have mentioned earlier, is people who were positive from before that the results are now coming in for, right? It's not going to change what we are doing in here with regards to the inmates. I mean, it's good to know, oh, hey, this person is turned positive. No, it's good to know, but it's not going to change what we are doing. And as we mentioned, we do have 8 pending positive prisoners. My experience, most of the time, if the result says pending positive, most of the time it then becomes positive. But we have had 1 or 2 people that they pending positive, the update then labeled them as negative, right? But if they were to become positive the next day or 2 when the lab does the confirmatory test, I won't be surprised. So the word for the public is don't be surprised or shocked or even frightened. if we still get a few more cases, because we still have results outstanding. But in the grand scheme of things, those would be old results. In fact, the current standard for treatment internationally for a positive asymptomatic person is 10 days of isolation, with 14 days of isolation for individuals who had symptoms. So you can understand that some of these people, when their positives come back now, be it staff or inmates, that they will have largely passed their time already, right? So again, that's why I can say that Dodds has been through the worst already, right? I hope that answers.
I may have one more question.
I have one for
I have one
Superintendent.
question.
For
Could
me?
you,
Okay, yes, go ahead.
could you explain stable when you say that most of the prisoners and
Well, not most. I would like to say all. I would like to say they're all stable.
Could you
And
explain stable and what?
stable meaning that we have, as I would have said, a medical facility with 18 beds and 2 critical care beds, and they're all empty. No one is ill enough or have any issues that require them to be admitted to the facility at present. We had 3 people in the facility since the facility has been stood up, and all 3 have improved and been discharged from that facility. So that's why we could say it's stable. The medical staff here at the prison, in conjunction with the staff that we have graciously borrowed from Queen Elizabeth Hospital, right? They monitor the blocks every day with special attention to the blocks that have a known positive inmates, and checking for just that, checking for symptoms and so on, because sometimes patients with COVID can deteriorate very quickly. You can go from pretty minor, I got a sore throat, to needing a ventilator. So they do that every day, and as I said, at present, nobody requires the medical facility right now.
So as I understand you, the situation is stable, but the medical, the sickness of a person, you're not speaking to that, but you're speaking to the situation that is stable.
I'm speaking to both. Both.
Just trying to understand.
No problem. I'm speaking to both. So the overall situation is stable, and then again, from the medical perspective, is also stable, or better yet, I would say improving. Right? As we mentioned, 73 people got discharged yesterday, and further 34 should be discharged tomorrow. And what that does is that improves the leeway for the guys dealing with logistics, like Major Proverbs and Colonel Nurse, because then you can move those people around. The other thing is that individuals who have been positive, be they staff or inmates, right, at least for a reasonable period of time, would be exactly the sort of people you would want around, because their chance of getting back COVID and spreading it again are minuscule, right?
Question, Superintendent?
Okay, cool.
Yeah, you?
Is Superintendent. I have a question.
Good,
for the
okay.
Superintendent. Okay, yourself, along with a number of your officers who would have been at the Hilton, are now out of quarantine negative. Have those men as yet been redeployed into the system?
The answer to that is yes, those who have reported to duty. As you pointed out, myself included, we were in quarantine because we were tested very early. On the day we were informed that we had this problem, everyone who was on duty was tested, and we went into immediate quarantine. A significant number of us tested negative twice, and were eventually released, and the vast majority of those persons have joined the working parties that we have here at the prison.
When you say the vast majority, what has happened to the others? There were duplication or something, or they have underlying conditions that they didn't return?
Some of them have not returned. Some have produced sick leave certificates. We have not gone beyond that. If you have produced a sick leave certificate, you have produced a sick leave certificate. But as the minister said earlier, there were some persons who, quite a number of us, 102 I think the number was, who did yeoman service for the first 15 days and did so in a way that was extremely commendable. We now have another 70 who were in quarantine who have come out and likewise are producing a fantastic amount of work.
Like sanitizing this week.
Sanitizing, caring and treating to the prisoners, making sure that they're properly fed, and so on. You know, and I as superintendent, I feel very proud to be associated with these types of persons. And I too would like to join the minister in thanking them from the bottom of my heart, not only as their superintendent, but as a human being, for the type of dedication to duty, the type of camaraderie and bravery that they have demonstrated. And I feel proud to be their superintendent of prisons. Thank you.
What's the morale of
question,
the
please.
Just one more question. What's the morale now of the prison?
The morale.
Yes.
The morale was always high. We're always smiling. We always get on with our task. Major Proverbs can speak to the morale when he was here in charge. I can speak to that which it obtains now. And I will say to you the mere fact that we have some 70 people who have responded to the call immediately, without any urging, and is testimony to that morale. Do I need to go any further? I don't think so.
Okay, I have a question for either you or the minister. We're hearing that the prison was prepared for H1N1, etc. But, you know, nobody was prepared for COVID. So have there been any shortcomings that you've detected in the prison? Will you be doing anything for the future, in the future to deal with if this happens again, or any other situations like this?
I can take a quick shot, but I will leave the minister as well to address it. But H1N1, the procedures for H1N1, the procedures that we had in place here is an annual process, because as you know, annually we do have flu seasons and so on. And a lot of the procedures are exactly the same. Proper hand sanitization, proper social distancing, keeping the place clean and so on. So we did that routinely every year. When we had the advent of COVID-19, we ramped up and were able to do a lot more sanitation around the place, sanitization, emphasizing social distance, a lot more education in terms of reaching out to not only to the staff but to prisoners in how we do our business. What has happened on the 31st, when we first identified the problem, gives us more scope for improvement, yes. Okay? Whereas you can tell when something is happening when you have people exhibiting symptoms, how do you operate when that person looks totally healthy, is following all of the protocols, but yet they're positive? So these are things that we learn. The prison service has been the unit that has had this problem up front. There's going to be a lot of lessons learned that we will be able to share, and hopefully other organizations will learn from those lessons as well, and we can prevent as much as possible a recurrence. Minister?
Okay, allow me just to say, it is not a perfect situation. Everyone in the world was not 100% prepared for what unfolded with COVID-19. No responses were perfect because it was an evolving situation. I will say that over the last 15 days, I think the prison has come a long way in understanding how to deal with these things and trying to perfect the protocols that we actually have in place. So I am comfortable that those on staff here have been doing as much as they can within the circumstances to make life comfortable for the inmates and to secure the proper running of the prison. I just want to say one thing before we close. Quite often, it is the sensational reports that make it. Quite often, it is the one or two people who have a lot to say that is negative, that overshadow all the good that is being done. There are 790 prisoners in Her Majesty's Prison Dodds. Almost every person has been allowed a phone call home or to communicate with their relatives or their loved ones. We have gotten a lot of feedback from persons calling us to say thank you, from people messaging me to say thank you for letting their son, right, or their boyfriend or their husband contact them. We have tried as much as we could to facilitate every single reasonable request during this period, coming from a prison officer or even coming from the inmates in Her Majesty's prison. And we've had 2 sensational, what I would say, negative reports, right? 2 from 790. I am satisfied that the staff at the prison have been doing their best in what is an exceedingly difficult situation. So are there any further questions before we conclude?
Just wanted to know, any idea when virtual visits will be able to resume for what you're talking about, like the calls and so on?
We are trying to resume as many of the normal procedures as quickly as possible because the aim is to make people comfortable. If people are comfortable, then you get less issues in a prison setting. Right now, we do not have the staff capacity, and because of the restrictions on movement, it is difficult to put those sort of things in place at this point in time. All of the non-essential services in the prison have been cut out entirely, right? As the officers who are here have to manage every single thing, and it's difficult to police all of those aspects properly. And I'm not prepared to sacrifice the security of the prison just to accommodate what is not an essential service. What we do, and we will continue to do, is try as much as we can to get the messages out, or if you contact us with a query about somebody in here, then with their permission, we will update you as to their condition. That's the best we can do now, but as soon as possible, we will return to a normal state because that's what all of us want. All right?
We have one final question. What is the policy now as it relates to prisoners coming to HMP Dodds, those who commit crimes? I realize that some were sent to St. Anne's Fort recently. I'm trying to find out in terms of how many prisoners St. Anne's Fort can accommodate, and if any will be brought here.
I understand that across the board, there's no unnecessary remand. So if you are reading the papers, magistrates are not remanding anybody unless absolutely critical. Some persons were charged with murder, so obviously you can't grant bail for that in that circumstance, so they were accommodated at St. Anne's Fort. I can't honestly tell you how many cells are there, but adequate provision was made to handle the essential cases at St. Anne's Fort. We will try as quickly as we can get the situation here under complete control and have it resolved, and we get clearance from the Chief Medical Officer, then we'll be able to continue our function, taking in people and releasing people on a normal basis. Right now, I'm more concerned with releasing those that have to get out, and I'm glad that the courts are not sending many our direction. So allow me once again to close as I started and thank all of the prison officers whose brave sacrifice. It was difficult for a lot of them, but eventually people settled down and understood that they had a national duty to perform. This is an essential service. People have to come to work and do their duty in order to secure the safety of the prison and the safety of the Barbadian population. The prisoners cannot guard themselves. So for all those officers who, in a very difficult situation, stepped up to the plate, I thank you, and I continue to thank you. For those who have completed quarantine, or in some cases completed isolation and reported back for duty, I thank you. For those who, on completing quarantine, straight away sent in 6 certificates, then I wish you the best of health and a speedy recovery, and that you return to your duties here and assist in the operations at the prison. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all.